about the basic Angular architecture. We discussed about how Angular application works. So we learned about Angular application flow. Angular application flow, how it works. So the basic architecture and the workflow, how it is going to work. Now, first, after understanding all those, now we are going to start with Angular components. So the first important in Angular framework, we have to learn about components. So technically, what are components and how they work? Already I given you overview about what Angular contains. Yesterday we discussed that framework is a combination of components, services, pipes, and various types of other things. So technically, components are building blocks for Angular application. Components are considered as building blocks for Angular application. Means application is built by using components. So component comprises of one is markup. Actually, it comprises of presentation. It comprises of styles and the logic. Three things a component contains. Presentation is designed using HTML, and styles are defined using CSS, and logic is defined by using the language TypeScript. So a component is built with presentation, styles, and logic. Presentation is markup we design by using HTML. To make the markup effective, we use CSS. And to make the markup dynamic, means to make it function, we need TypeScript. So component is built with these three things. Now, everywhere components are very common. I will show you components are very common. For example, if you have to build a website, then you can design your own components, or you can use some predefined components. For example, I want to design a carousel. Suppose you see Amazon. In Amazon, you see we can find a sliding banner. This is carousel. We call this as carousel. Sliding banner is there. Now I want to design like this. Now we don't design this manually. What we do, we have Bootstrap. In Bootstrap, I will take you to documents. In Bootstrap documents, you will find a category called components. you will see components and clear name components. And when you select components, so many components are present. In that we have a component called carousel. We will get this carousel component. This is the carousel component. Whatever logic is required, it is given to us. We have to just implement and customize according to our requirements. For that, whatever library is required, we have to import and we need to use it. So we don't waste time in real-time development. We design everything by using components. So navigation bar, it's a component. Carousel, it's a component. So everything is designed by using components. So what a component contains, it contains some presentation, effects, some functionality. I click previous slide will come. I click next slide will come, some functionality. So in Angular also, you have two options. You can use ready-made components or you can build components. So that means Angular allows to use, number one, predefined components. Predefined components provided by material, Angular material, provided by Angular material. We have a library called Angular material. This library is same like Bootstrap. They will provide all the components for Angular. You can use those components and build application, or it allows to use custom components. Custom components means we can create our own components. So two choices are there. You can use ready-made components and you can use your own components. You can build your own components. So you see, generally HTML, JavaScript people use Bootstrap like third party. But for Angular, we have material. This is Angular material. This Angular material, you see, components for Angular. That means it provides components for Angular. We can use these components and we can build application. So you see, so many components are there. I go to components category. You see, same lot of components are present here. We can use these components and we can build application. We will learn both. We will learn how to design our own components and how to use these components existing. But in order to use existing components, first you have to learn how a component is designed. Because if you have to use ready-made component, you should know where to make changes, how it is designed. So first we will learn how to create our own components. Then we will use these third-party components and build application. So two choices are there. You can build an Angular application with the help of third-party components. Third-party components means not only material. So many are there. For example, you see, we have Telerik. Telerik is another very popular. Telerik is another popular third party. You can see these people You can see these people are customers of Telerik. NASA is customer of Telerik. That means now you can imagine the Telerik abilities. That means Telerik is a third party providing software support for NASA like people. Microsoft, IBM, these are the customers of Telerik. Remember, they are big software development companies and they are customers of Telerik. They are customers of Telerik means Telerik is providing lot of support for them also. So you can see here also they will give you, but this is not free. We have to pay. You can see they provide components for Angular. When I go to Angular, they will provide components for Angular. These are all components for Angular. So many components are there. Because in the beginning, I already told you, everything we cannot build manually. And our technology is not enough for every requirement that client wants. Client wants some charts in a dashboard. We don't have. We have to borrow from third parties. Client wants a barcode reader. We don't have barcode reader. Then we have to borrow from third parties. So any technology in the world is not complete in fulfilling all the requirements of client. We have to depend on a lot of such third parties. Some are free, some you have to pay, right? So in Angular, two things you will learn: how to create your own components and how to use predefined components provided by various libraries. Both things we will see. First, we will see how to handle custom components. We will see custom components. That means we will learn how to build our own components. Actually, if you want to build your own components, so there are two types of documentation techniques. There are two types of documentation techniques for designing component. We have two types of documentation techniques for designing component. What are those two types of documentation techniques? One is we have inline documentation. And we have code behind documentation. Inline documentation and code behind documentation. We have two types of documentation technique. That means a component can be built in two ways. We can build a component in two ways: by using inline technique and by using code behind. What is difference is, actually, inline documentation means generally in this technique presentation, styles and logic all are defined in one file. Everything designed in one file. The presentation, the logic and the effects all are defined in one file. We call that as inline documentation technique. That means we discussed that component needs presentation, component needs styles, and component needs logic. So actually, inline technique means what happens is, we will have one file. In this file, the markup will be there. markup will be there. In this file, the styles will be there. In this file, the logic will be there. Everything is maintained in one file. This kind of technique is called inline technique. What is good? What is bad about inline technique? What is good about inline technique is, so first thing, inline technique is you already know as a web developer. If everything present in a single file, the number of requests will reduce. The number of requests for a page will reduce. If number of requests for page reduce, then page load time will improve. Generally, we know that. That means, suppose you are designing a file. We are designing a file, index.html. We want to use some styles inside it. Then the question is, will you write styles inside this page? Or will you write styles in a separate CSS file? Which one is better? Depending on situation, if I want the styles to be used across pages, then we will maintain in a separate CSS file. Unnecessarily, we will not maintain in a separate CSS file, because maintaining CSS, JavaScript in separate files and using them in a HTML page will increase the number of requests. One request will go to HTML, another request will go to CSS. If number of requests increase, page load time increases. So what is good about inline documentation? It reduces the number of requests and improves the page load time. Reduces the number of requests. If number of requests are reduced, the page load time will improve. So that is good. But what is bad here? What is bad in this inline technique? Bad is obviously, if everything is present in one file, you will have reusability issues. Reusability issues will come. It is hard to reuse. And separation issues will come. And extensibility issues will come. Extensibility issues will come. That means I need to add some more features later. Extending a single file is always difficult. And it is hard to test. Testing issues will come. Because everything is embedded in one location. Logic, presentation, and effects. Hard to test, hard to extend, hard to reuse. Separation concerns are there. These are all the problems with inline documentation. Then when to use it? So if you need a component, that doesn't require regular extensions, and have a fixed functionality, then better you can go with inline. That means sometimes, suppose I am trying to design a login screen. In a login screen, every time same concept: username, password, login. And after few days, will you add anything new to it? Nothing. Every time login is same. But you are creating some registration module. Every few days, some new fields I need to add, some fields I need to remove. I need to keep changing. dynamically. In that case, that is not good. Many components we design in such a way that we don't need to extend them. Suppose I am using here, suppose you see Netflix. Netflix is component based. It is component based. Now in this header always same, registration always same, right? Then in that case, we can design the header in an inline technique because we don't need to make any changes there. Every time same functionality. Same. That means it will have only these options. It will have only this button. And that button functionality also same. There is no need of any extensions for this and all, until or unless after several months they plan to add one more language into it. That is rarely, and that is not a big issue because it is a very rare extension. So regular extensions are required, then inline documentation is not good, right? So when to use inline documentation? So when you need a component so which doesn't require regular changes, regular extensions, then better go with inline document. Now we will see how to design by using inline documentation. First, one by one we will see. Now again, one more point is there. What is code behind documentation? Code behind documentation, everything is cleanly separated. Presentation, separate file. Logic, separate file. Styles, separate file. Now you can imagine difference. We will come back to that. First we will see what is inline, how to handle. Again, another point is that, okay, inline documentation is one technique. Now the question is how to add a component. So another question is how to add a component. How to add a component? There are two techniques. So you can add component. You can add component into project, into application. You can add component into application by using two techniques again. You can add component into application by using two techniques. One is manually. Another one is by using Angular CLI commands. By using Angular CLI commands. We can add manually and by using CLI commands. Actually, by using CLI commands, this technique is called as scaffolding. We call manually and by using scaffolding. So manually and scaffolding, these are the two techniques actually. What is manually? Everything you have to add. Means you need to create a file by yourself. You need to maintain everything by yourself. Scaffolding is nothing but, actually scaffolding is a technique. This scaffolding technique, for example, scaffolding is a technique. Actually, scaffolding is a technique that came from a technology called Ruby. We have a technology called Ruby. Ruby on Rails, actually. From Ruby on Rails, we got this scaffolding concept. And almost every technology is using this technique. We have server-side scaffolding. We have client-side scaffolding. I hope if you have learned Java, .NET or some other programming languages, I hope you have seen, suppose you need to add one class. There will be a button add class. When you click a button add class, then what it will do is, many technologies you might have seen, They will give ready-made structure. That means they will give class some name, in that some structure. Ready-made, they will give you some structure. There you have to make some changes. That means you just ask what you want, then automatically it will generate some sample code and give it to you. What you have to do, replace the sample code and add your own code. So you tell your requirements, according to your requirements, automatically the logic is generated. That is called scaffolding. Scaffolding means you tell your requirements, that software will take care about design. That means you just tell, I want a class. Then how a class should be designed, the basic structure it will give to you. Rest of changes you can do. That is called scaffolding. So scaffolding means a developer tells his requirements and software will design everything for her. So that is what actually this CLI commands will do. You just tell, I want component. Then it will generate a component with ready-made logic inside. Whatever a component is needed, right? It will put everything into it. We call that mechanism as scaffold. So we will learn both techniques, how to add a component manually and how to add a component by using CLI commands, by using scaffolding technique. Let's see. First thing, so what we are going to do, add a new component using inline technique. Add a new component using inline technique manually. Okay. That means now we are going to add a new component using inline technique manually. We will see how to add components first manually. After that, we will see commands. How to add a new component using inline technique. To add a new component using inline technique, you need to know some rules actually. Remember, what are the basic rules? First one, every component is a TypeScript class. Every component is a TypeScript class. So if every component is a TypeScript class, how compiler knows that it is a component? Yesterday we discussed it. So component, am I right? Component is a directive used to configure class as component. It is used to configure class as component. Now it is a member of Angular @Angular/core library. It is a member of Angular core library. So in order to use that directive, first what we have to do is we have to import component from which location? Angular core library. We have to import first. We have to import from the Angular core library. And how to design the component? To design the component, we are using module system. In a module system, what we have to do? First I will give you the structure here. We have to put export class, the component name, some home component, that is the component name, but it is not done. Above, we have to mark it as what? Component. We have to mark it as component. So why to use export? Because we are using a module system. In a module system, Angular uses a module system. In a module system, anything you maintained in a file, it is accessible only in that file, not outside. For that, you have to mark it as export. Export. You can keep export default also, right? Already we discussed that. So to design a component, first you should know that every component is a TypeScript class, and it is marked with component directive, and component directive comes from Angular core library. You have to import it and you have to use it. Now, very important is every component name must have the suffix. It must have the suffix component. It must have the suffix component. Actually, in early versions, it's not an issue, but now they made it mandatory that every component must have a suffix component. It should have a suffix component. Means we have to write component at the end, suffix as component. Next, another important is every component directive must define three basic elements. So it must define three basic elements. Every component directive must define three basic elements. What are those three basic elements? That means when you design a component directive, this is component directive. This component directive it takes an object. In this object, we have to define three basic elements. One is selector. Second one is styles URL, so many other I will tell you. So third one is template. These three things are basic. That means the selector, the styles, and the template. Selector, styles, and template. That means every component marker should have a selector. It must have a selector. And every component must have styles. Styles is an array. Selector is a string. And it must have a template. Template is also a string. Now, every component basically have presentation. Every component have styles. Presentation is defined. That means what is selector? Selector is used to access a component. And embed in any page or another component. If you want to access the component and use somewhere else, then you need a selector. Every component needs a selector. And generally, remember, selector must have prefix app. Selector must have the prefix app. That means you need to define the selector like this. Selector, you have to define app-home like this. App home, app login, app register. It's compulsory, mandatory that every component selector must have the prefix app. It must have the prefix app. Okay. Next. Another important, styles is nothing but styles define a set of style attributes with selectors. You know that CSS needs selector, na? CSS needs a selector. That means generally how we write styles. Styles is an array of string type, and every string contains selector. What is the selector? Suppose heading. For heading, what effects you want? That means for heading, I want some background color, background hyphen color, something like this. So some red like this we need to define. So we need to configure the effects like this. If I want multiple, then I will put a comma, another string. Here for paragraph, what effects you want. You can use, type selector, ID selector, class selectors. You can use any here. CSS selectors, you can use any selector. So I'm using P, I'm using heading, means they are type selectors. We have type, we have ID, class, descendant, so many selectors you can use. Styles are written like this. Next important is template. Template defines the markup to render. That means what markup, what presentation you have to give. That presentation is designed in template. That means what we do, we write template. In the template, we design the markup. And very important here, markup, I will use backtick. You know the meaning. Backtick allows expressions. Backtick allow expressions. But very important here is I will put a heading. I will put whatever markup I want here. So technically here very important is Angular template, binding expression, template binding expression. Angular template binding expression is defined in double curly brace like this. Actually in JavaScript, how you define? In JavaScript, the binding expression is defined in dollar curly brace. That is the JavaScript binding expression. Already we know in a string, if I want to bind any expression, for that we have to use dollar curly brace. But in Angular, template binding expression is defined by using double curly brace, not dollar curly brace, right? So this is what we do for binding. For example, suppose we have a heading and here I want to bind some dynamic value, then we use a binding expression and we will put some title. Actually, title is nothing but, so in your class, title is a property. This title property contains some welcome, something like this, that we have to bring and put in heading. Then we have to define by using binding expression. Actually, in JavaScript and TypeScript, we use dollar curly brace. These are all the basic things for designing a component. These are all the basic things you need to know for designing a component. So let's see how to design a component, right? Yeah. First, let's open the project, and our project is our workspace Angular. Okay. Now here, let's add. First, what we are doing is, we will go to this SRC folder. And as I already told you, Angular related components, services, factories, everything kept in app folder. So let's go to app folder. In that already so many files are there, but these all belong to one component. We will not use this. We will create our own component. So better, we will maintain a separate folder here. In select app and create new folder. and create a folder by name components. We will put all our components inside this components. We will put all the components inside this components folder. You can put directly, but later so many components will happen. All files at one place leads to lot of confusion, right? So I will keep components. Okay. In components, for every component, you can maintain again separate folder for every component, because every component contains 4 files, right? So the TypeScript file, the HTML file, CSS file, test file, then it will be so much messed up if there are many components. So better classify cleanly, right? Anyhow, currently we are using inline, means only one file will be there. But still, what I will do, in components, I will create another folder. I will give the name as login. In components, I am creating a folder called login, and here we will add a new component. Component is nothing but a TypeScript class. How to add a TypeScript class already we know. Create a new file, create new file, and the file name I will give as login.component.ts. As I told you that components must have the suffix component. So login is your component name. Dot component is not extension. It is just suffix. Extension is TS. It's an ordinary TypeScript file. Right now the file is ready. Now in this file, this is the file we need to configure as a component. What I will do is, in this file, I will create export class. I will give login component. In this login component, I will put some title. These are properties and methods. You can have any property and method. Title I will give as user login. That is the title. Okay. I will use single quotes because actually default Angular 13 TS config is set with single quotes for string. Of course, you can use double quotes, but it will show you warnings like in TS config it is double quote. Are you sure you want to use single quote? It's okay, it will work, but we don't want to violate the standards. So you can change in TS config from double quote, single quote, double quote, your wish, right? Now, this is okay. Another important, you learned that data type is important to configure because it is TypeScript. Anyhow, it will take already type inference mechanism. It will determine the data type. Better you configure the type. What is it? String. It is a string type, and specify the options. So this is also we can control in TS config. That means in TS config, you can set a rule. That rule can tell that you don't need to mention data type. You can just mention only name and assign some value. But if you are not initializing, you are just declaring, then issue will come. It will take as any type. So better define the data types, right? Okay. Now, this is an ordinary TypeScript class. It is not a component. Then how do you make this as a component? For that, first we have to import. Import from Angular /core library. We have to import component. We have to import this component. Now we need to use that component as a marker directive @component. And component contains an object. You see obj. Object means a curly brace. And as per the rules, every component must contain selector. The selector for this is app login. And here we have to define what template you want. Template meant what presentation. What is the presentation you want? Presentation, because we are currently using inline technique. In inline technique, presentation, logic, everything present in one file. Everything present in this file. So here we have to design the presentation in backtick. Because backtick is good, you can use single quote, but if you are not having any expressions, later if you want to put some dynamic value, single quote, double quote will not allow. So better use template in backtick. And here I am designing the template. So let's create a heading and close. And here I want to access this title. I want the title to update every time whenever I make change here. So I have to embed that in heading by using template binding expression. Here we have to put the title. In JavaScript, we use $curly brace. In Angular, the template binder is this double curly brace. And here we are designing a login screen. I will put a data list. And in the data list, I will put a data term. And here I say user name. And data definition, input type is equal to text. And close. Another data term, password, and data term, data definition, input type is equal to password. And okay, and I defined some login. So a button, okay, and the button says login. Just this is the design I created. I will keep this login button after this data list. This is the design. So I configured a small design here. It is ready. Now styles are optional. If you want styles, you can apply the styles. Otherwise, you can leave it. Now I want to apply styles. Then let's do one thing. We will put another option. What is it? Styles. And you see, you already see that styles is a question mark, means it is optional. Question mark means it is optional. You can ignore it, right? If it is not optional, mandatory, right? Now it is a string array. It is a string array means you can just configure as colon array. Array of string type. In that, what effects you want? For example, wherever data term is there, I want to put font weight as bold. That is the effect I want to apply. If you want multiple, then we have to put again another. What effect you want? Suppose for heading, I want to apply some color as red. So color as green, something like this. You know, multiple effects are defined with again semicolon. You can put background color. You know how to write styles. You can put semicolon, multiple effects. Initially, first we will put here like this. Now it is ready. Now you have the component ready. But you added this component manually. Your Angular application doesn't know about it. Your Angular application doesn't know about it. Now, how Angular application knows about the new component that you added and how it loads into memory? Who is responsible for loading the components, services into memory? Yesterday we discussed that is done by app module. Remember, who is responsible for loading the components, loading the services, everything that is done by using app module. So what we have to do now, we have to go to the app module.ts. And I already told you where components are declared. Components are defined in declarations. So to use in declarations, first you have to import that component. So let's import. Import from, it is present in dot slash, or you can, because it is app folder na, it is in same folder, then dot slash. Dot slash means same folder. In the same folder we have components. In components we have login. That is the component. And from here, what we have, that is login is a folder. In login folder, login component. That is how we have to import. Already we know how to import a class. We learned module system. And here, what is that we have to import? We have to import login component class. But what is advantage in your Visual Studio Code is, you just type the class name, it will look for the path automatically. That's good, right? So that you don't need to write the path. It will import this automatically. For example, I am not writing this. Without writing this, directly in declarations here, don't remove existing components, because we need existing components. To that existing component, we are adding another component. What is the component? Login component. It can identify your component. Just press tab key. Press tab key. Automatically it will import. That means you can see it imports. But anyhow, I showed you how to write manually, right? You can write manually or you can import. So the IntelliSense, we call this as Visual Studio Code IntelliSense. By using that IntelliSense, it can track and it can import. So it is easy for developers to easily import them. Otherwise, there is no problem. You already know how the import happens. Now, still, login component is added, but it is not in the index page. In index page, this component will not come. How to make anything come in index page? We have to mention in Bootstrap. Bootstrap indicates to which component to start with. Currently, it is already starting with app. Along with app, you want login, or replacing the tab you want login. You decide. Because you can show multiple components, no problem. That means along with the app component, you can show your login also. But I don't want app component. Instead of app component, I want login component. In that case, we can remove this in the Bootstrap and you can keep it login component. That means now our application starts with login. But when you set Bootstrap as login component, that must be defined in index page. That means you have to go to index page. In index page, you go to index page. Here it is app root. Now we have to remove this app root and we have to put app login. That's how we need to define. Compulsory. Remember, if you mentioned any component in index, it must be in Bootstrap. It must be in Bootstrap. Index page can show only the components which are defined in Bootstrap. You can add app root also. It's your wish. That means first login will come. After login, app root will come. We can present multiple components. Multiple components later I will show you. As of now, we are replacing, but this is not suitable now because we removed in Bootstrap. Here also what you have to do, add app component. Then it is okay. Because it is array, you can add multiple components. As of now, we will put only the component that we designed. Then we have to just put only login. So everything ready. So everything ready. What is the hierarchy? First, we added a component. We designed a component with logic, with styles, and with presentation. But it is inline technique. Everything is present in one file. And we registered that component in declarations. We registered that in declarations. Otherwise, it cannot work. And we mentioned in Bootstrap because we want to start it. And if we mentioned in Bootstrap in index, we have to configure it. We have to configure that in the index. Now everything ready, start. Now start your project and see. So ng serve project is equal to shopping. That is the project. Let's start. I'm compiling and running this project. So if there is a problem in reference, you haven't mentioned in Bootstrap, you are giving a wrong selector. In Bootstrap, it is app login, app root, and here you are using different, then all errors will come here, whatever the errors you have committed. Now, if there are no errors, it will successfully compile. Then we can check our application starts with login. Meanwhile, let's put that in the notes here. First step, example now. Example, first point is go to app folder. Go to app folder in project. Add following folders. So that is components. In components, login. Components, in the components, we will put a folder called login. Right? That is. Add a new file into login. What is the file name? Login.component.ts. That is the new file we have to add into login. And in this is the code. Let me copy the code. I copied this code. This is the code. Right? We have to do this. So this is the login code. Next step. Number 4, we have to go to app.module.ts and import login component. Login component. And login component. So here we have to import the login component. This is importing the login component, and we have to keep that in declarations. I will just keep that declarations. I just keep the declarations. One more we have to do. So define in Bootstrap. Define in Bootstrap. Login component must be defined in Bootstrap. This is also done. After that, one more work is there. We have to go to index.html. In index.html, we have to keep this in the body. In the body, we have to keep app login. That's the work. Now, everything is ready. Let's run this and see. Already successfully compiled. It says successfully compiled. Once it is successfully compiled, access that here. Localhost 4200 and your login is there. And your login is having all the effects also you mentioned. We have style, color as green, font weight bold for this. Right? Whatever the effects you configured, all those effects are here. And you are making any change. So in the login component, you are making any change. That means you are adding styles, you are adding effects, everything will be here. For example, so heading, I added one more some font family. So here I said Arial. I saved it, and automatically that affects here. That means we can modify, you can configure according to the requirements. So technically, how we design a component and how we present. This is only beginning level, right? Functionality, so much work is there here. So we learned how to design a component by using inline technique. Okay. So this is ready, and we learned how to register and how do we start. Now, the second technique is, this is manual. First we will see all manual, then we will go with shortcut commands, how to do. Now, what is the second technique? Like this, you can add any number of components and all, multiple components, integrating them, all these one by one we will learn. So, inline component is ready, right? Inline component means everything kept in one file. Now, we will see how we can use code behind technique. We will see code behind technique. Code behind technique. So code behind technique, generally in this technique, presentation, so styles and logic are defined in separate files. Presentation, logic are defined in separate files. Styles, everything in separate files. So what is good, what is bad? It is easy to extend. If they are maintained in separate files. Clean separation of presentation, logic and styles. Everything will be cleanly separated. Clean separation of presentation, logic and styles. Easy to test. We can easily extend, we can easily test. So clean separation of presentation, logic and all. But what is problem? So if number of requests increase, then page load time also increases. If number of requests increase, page load time also increases. But if you want a component to regularly change, to regularly extend, then this is the only way. We have to maintain code behind technique. In code behind technique, so we maintain separately. Now here important is, here very important is the component comprises of 4 files. The fourth file we will ignore because that is related to testing. We will see at the end. So as of now, every component we will add only 3 files. Fourth file we will ignore, but every component will have 4 files. One is component.html file. Another one is component.css file. Another one is component.ts file. Another one is component.spec.ts file. So this HTML presentation, CSS styles and component TS will be logic and this will be testing. Now, very important, the component marker needs, means we can say better component directive. The component directive needs the following properties. following properties. What are the properties we need? One is selector, already we know. Second one, now it is template URL. Template URL, because you are using code behind technique. In code behind technique, design is in another file. You have to bring that file and link it. That means template URL. Here we have to keep the component HTML file. That means the path for the component file. We have to mention the path. If you are designing inline technique, the design is present directly here. But if it is in code behind technique, the design will come from another file, and that file is HTML. One more point, styles also will change. Styles URL, it will be an array. Because you know that a HTML page can use multiple style sheets. More than one style sheet we can use. It's not necessary that only one style sheet we have to use. That means here we have to define style sheet 1. You have to define style sheet 2. You can put any number of style sheets. For their path you have to mention. That means here we have to mention the path of style sheet 1, the path of style sheet 2, like this. So only one change will be there. Only one change will be there. Only one change will be there. What is that change? Template URL and styles URL. Because we are using a separate documentation technique, right? Now let's see how we can create this and define. How we can create and define. So we need code behind technique. Let's go. I will go to the components folder. In the components folder, see, because absolute freshers who are not aware of proper HTML earlier, they always face problem in adding the files. That means which folder they selecting, in which folder they are adding the file, path references, that is where people face problem. Whenever you are adding a file, make sure that you selected that concerned folder. That means you should not add into login. We should add into components. So select that components and add a new folder again. This time I will give register. So now in register, we have to add, three files. Let's add three files. Number one, register.component.ts. Okay. Second, register.component.html. Okay. Another one, register.component.css. These are the three files. Testing file we are not adding because for that we need to learn testing first. So these three files are enough. Okay. Now let's go to the design. First we have to go to TS file. In TS file, you know what to do. Import, what is it? Component from Angular core. And here we have export class. This is register component. Okay. In that we have some title. Title is a string type. So register user, something like this. As of now, I'm just giving only that. Next, at the net component. The component this time will have selector. Selector is same. What is that selector? So selector is, we have app register. That is the selector. Next we have template URL. Template URL is dot slash because it is in the same folder. Dot slash means it is in the same folder. What is the file name? Register dot component dot html. That is the file. Now next we have style URL. Style URL is an array. In that array we have to mention dot slash register dot component dot what CSS. That's how we need to configure. Now this is the ready, but we don't have any HTML and CSS. Okay, now let's go to HTML and design HTML. I will put a div, I will put a class, I will put container, and inside the div I am designing a form, and inside that I keep a heading. We will put a binding expression, bring the title there, and here I am creating a data list, data term, and here I am defining some username. So data definition input type is text, and here I defined email. So input type is equal to email. So just few things I will give here, and city. So and data definition we will put and select with an option like this. Okay, and we are adding some password, just input type password, just additionally we are adding something, right? So password like this we designed, and we will put here a button that is register. Same like login, I designed some other page here. Okay, now I will go to the styles. Here I will go here register component dot CSS. In CSS, in HTML, we created a class called container, and I will write here container. And for container, what effects? Display as flex, justify content center, align items center. I'm using height as 400 pixel, and I'm giving form with border as 2 pixel, solid gray. I will give padding for form as 20 pixel. So we will put border radius as 20 pixel. Like this I am adding some effects. That is for container, form, and everything we defined, right? And here another data term is there. I will put data term font weight as a bold. Like this we configured. Now let's run this and see. That means already our application is running, but which one is in the startup? Login is in the startup. We need to keep register in the startup. You can keep both. I will show you, but first I want to keep register in the startup. Then what I will do? Let's go to app module. Here we have to first register, declare which component? Register component. It imports automatically for you, and you need to make it in the startup. What is it? Register component. We have to make it in the startup. And one more work is there. In index.html, we have to keep app what? Register. We need to keep app register. That is done. Now you see here. So you see in the login screen, that means the register is ready. That means we created a register component and keeping it ready here. So we are designing simple effects and configuring them. Now important is we can have multiple components. We can keep multiple components. I want both login and register to display. That depends on your requirement, how you want to configure and display. Lot of work is there. For example, if you want both components, generally what we do, in the body section, you need to decide how to design. In the body section, you need to design. Why? Because Actually, the body section, let's go app module. In this, I want login also. Then I will put in the Bootstrap login component also. Now we will go into index. In index, I will just put here, suppose a app login, and I will put a HR. HR is a horizontal line, and you can see it is going to display both login and register. We can have multiple components, right? We have a login and we have a register. Where you want, you can display. You can create side by side columns. We can display them, right? Because you know the techniques to handle. For example, suppose in the body section, I'm creating a div, and in this div, I created two more divs. In this, we have app login, and in another div, we have app. So register, we are having app register. Two things are there. For the parent div, I will put style display as grid. I'm using display as grid. I'm using grid template columns, grid template columns. I will give as 6 fractions and 6 fractions, 2 columns I am giving. This is all your CSS knowledge, right? In that case, the presentation will be displayed in this way. We have a login and we have a register. I'm just keeping them side by side, right? Where you want your wish, you can display anywhere you want, right? You can have multiple components in a page. You can configure multiple components in a page. So the presentation depends on this technique. And important is, suppose we are using login. In this login component is not in Bootstrap. Login component is not in Bootstrap. You see, login is not working. Even the selector is there. You can see in index page, the selector is there, but login is not displayed. Actually, we go inspect. So in the inspect, you see in the console, we don't have any problem here. We don't have any problem. In the elements, you see app login is there. App login is there. So here app register is there, but app login is never displayed. Because if we have to display, you should configure in Bootstrap. That's compulsory, right? Angular cannot include anything and render until or unless it is configured in Bootstrap. So in app module, you have to put that login also. There is no order your wish. Login, register, login, anything. So you can have multiple components also. Now it is working fine. And very important is, suppose here, I will go to index. I am not writing login. And I refresh here. It's not there. Let's go to inspect. In the console, you will find an error now. The error says that in Bootstrap, you said login. Where is login? In Bootstrap, if you mentioned login, that login must be there. You have to make sure that the login is there in the index. Whatever you defined in Bootstrap, it must be in index. Whatever you mentioned in index, if it is not in Bootstrap, it will ignore. Because you know HTML cannot show any debugger. Na? You know that HTML don't have any errors. HTML errors are not tracked by browser. HTML errors are not tracked by browser. You know that. You learned HTML. So this is the problem. So if anybody asks, like, can I have multiple components So you can have multiple components. You can have multiple components. You can display multiple components in a page. Of course, a page is designed with multiple components on, right? But you need to learn how to correctly place them and configure them, right? And this app module is important. Every component that you created, first register here. After registering the component, then select which one you want in the Bootstrap. It's not necessary that everything in that must be used in Bootstrap. Remember, currently we are not using routing. That is the reason what we do. Every day one component we design, keep it in the Bootstrap, go to index and fit that into index. But when we design routing, what will happen? Only one screen will come. In that screen, we will put navigation to every part. User will click and he will go to that location. That is later. As of now, every day we have to do this. Add a component, register component, put it in Bootstrap, test it and see. That's how we follow. Later we will learn integration of all of them, right? So now the second technique is, in this example, add a new folder. Add a new folder into components. What is the folder? We have to add a new folder, register. Now add following files. Following files into register folder. What are the files? Register.component.ts, register.component.html, register.component.css. Now here register.component.ts. In this is the code. I will copy that code. Here we will have style URLs, template URL. Another one, next, register.component.html. In HTML, we have register component HTML. This is HTML, right? We have another file. What is it? Register.component.css. In CSS, we can put this CSS. This is all the code. Rest of part, no need to tell. Other things you know. What you have to do. Next step, what you have to do. You go to app module, app.module.ts, and we have to set in declarations. In declarations, we need to register the component. In Bootstrap, you have to define the component. After that, you have to go to index.html. These two are common. I am not giving detail, just overview because already given. You have to define your component in declarations, Bootstrap and index, right? This is the basic thing. Now you learn two techniques: adding a component using inline technique, adding a component using code behind technique. Now we done this manually. Now another technique is we can add by using commands. If you are adding using commands, that's very easy. You don't need to add files. It will generate everything for you. We will see how to add with the help of commands. That we'll see next session, right? So today you have to practice all this, right? If you are good with this, then we can go into next part, right? Because you feel it's easy, but now the complexity will be very much growing, very complex. You can't handle if you don't practice daily tasks. Every day finish your work, what we discussed in class. Otherwise, you cannot catch up our speed. Because later you will get very complex things in Angular you can't handle. Even you have lot of experience also, you can't handle if you don't follow day by day practical approach of what we learned. So practice up to this part, right? Then in the next session we will see more complex things, how we can handle. Okay. Tomorrow we'll continue.